Welcome back to our channel of Security 2 and a very warm welcome to everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Here in this channel, as you know, we simplify cybersecurity for you. Today, we will be discussing what is ISO 27001 gap assessment. What is ISO 27001 gap assessment? Why is it important and how is it done? So let's get started without any further delay. Have you ever wondered how to figure out where your organization stands in terms of cybersecurity readiness? Or what's exactly stopping you from achieving ISO 27001 certification? I would suggest stick around because I'm going to break it all down for you in this video. Let's get started. And by the end of the session, you'll have a very clear understanding of the process and actionable steps to implement it within your organization. Okay, so now let's get started. What exactly is gap assessment? Imagine that you're planning a road trip, but before hitting the road, you check your car to see if you have enough gas, the tires are in good condition, and your maps are ready. A gap assessment is something very similar to this, but for your cybersecurity. In the context of ISO 27001, it's a systematic way to compare your current security measures with what's required by the ISO standard. It helps identify what's missing, what needs fixing, and how you can get your security set up in line with global best practices. Think of it as a map to guide you from where you are to where you need to be, which is ISO certified and secure. Now, if I explain you in a more professional and a formal manner, then it's a systematic process of comparing your current state with the desired future state of or standard. In this case, ISO 27001. Now, it helps identify what's missing, inadequate, or non compliant in your information security management system or ISMS. You get a roadmap to bridge those gaps, ensuring your organization meets the necessary requirements to achieve ISO 27001 certification. So now we've covered what is gap assessment. Now let's cover why is gap assessment important for ISO 27001. So why does a gap assessment matter? Well, let me ask you this. How would you fix something if you didn't even know that it was broken? A gap assessment helps you uncover those blind spots in your security setup. For example, it reveals areas where your processes or policies don't meet ISO 27001 standards. It prioritizes what you need to fix or rather focus on first, saving you time and money. And most importantly, it helps you reduce risks like data breaches and builds trust with your customers and stakeholders. In short, a gap assessment is your ticket to being proactive instead of reactive when it comes to cybersecurity. It helps identify non-conformities in your current processes, policies, and controls. This is critical because these non-conformities can lead to risks, compliance failures, or audit issues. Second, a gap assessment provides a structured approach to prioritize actions, ensuring your resources are focused where they are needed most. Third, it's an essential step towards achieving certification. It gives you a clear picture of what needed to be done. And finally, it strengthens your information security posture, reducing risks and building trust with stakeholders. Okay, now let's talk about the core of ISO 27001. It's built around 7 main clauses, which forms the foundation of your information security management system or ISMS in short. Here's what they cover. Okay, now clause 4, understanding the context of your organization. Clause 5, leadership roles in driving security. Clause 6, planning for risks and opportunities. Clause 7, providing resources and support. Clause 8, operational controls for security. Clause 9, measuring performance and conducting audits. Clause 10, continuous improvement to stay ahead of threats. Don't worry, I'll cover all of these clauses and I'll walk you through how to conduct a gap assessment for each of these. There are 6 steps to conduct a successful gap assessment. First, define the scope. Decide which parts of your organization and IT systems are included in the ISMS. Second, gather information. Basically, gather evidence. Collect all existing policies, procedures, and controls. Trust me, you will need this. It could be in the form of emails, communication within the organization, it could be a recorded meeting. Gather the evidence. Third, assess the current state. Compare the setup with ISO 27001 requirements. Is the customer, or if it's you, it's the organization, is it compliant or not? Fourth, identify the gaps. Pinpoint where you're falling short. This is the heart of the process. Fifth, prioritize gaps. Sort them into high, medium, and low priority based on risk. And last, develop an action plan. Create a step-by-step roadmap to close those gaps. Each step builds on the previous one, so follow them in a sequence for the best results. Now let's get over a detailed gap assessment for ISO 27001 clauses. Take each one of them one after the other. So now let's get specific for each ISO clause, and here's what you need to assess. Now let's discuss clause 4, which is context of the organization. Have you identified internal and external factors that affect your ISMS? Are your stakeholders' expectations documented? Is the scope of your ISMS clearly defined? So clause 4 requires organizations to understand their internal and external environment to establish an effective information security management system. This includes identifying factors that may impact the ISMS and defining its scope. So the key points here to note is, let's say, the internal factors: organizational structure, culture, IT systems, existing security practices. In the external factors, it would be regulatory requirements, market conditions, technological trends, threats like cyber attacks. Interested parties, it would be stakeholders such as customers, employees, suppliers, and regulators whose needs and expectations influence the ISMS. Scope definition. Clearly outline which parts of the organization, example specific departments, systems, processes, are covered by the ISMS. Now there are a few practical examples I can give you, like for example the internal factors which could probably influence. A bank must consider the handling of sensitive customer data across multiple branches and departments. The external factor example could be a healthcare provider must comply with HIPAA regulations for data protection in addition to ISO 27001 requirements. Now for example, what could be the scope? A manufacturing company may choose to include only its IT systems and exclude factory operations from the ISMS. So now clause 5 emphasizes the role of top management in demonstrating leadership and commitment to the ISMS. This includes establishing information security policies, assigning roles, and ensuring resources are available. Now the key points to note over here is the top management must actively support and be accountable for the ISMS. Remember, you need to be very sure that the top management is actively supporting your ISMS. Then, are roles and responsibilities for information security clearly defined? Is there a format communicated for information security policy? So for policy development, you need to develop and communicate. They need to develop and communicate an information security policy aligned with organizational objectives. Roles and responsibilities: assign clear responsibilities for information security within the organization. Now, a few practical examples, like leadership commitment. For example, the CEO includes ISMS updates in quarterly management meetings and ensures resources are allocated for its implementation. Then an example of policy. An organization establishes a policy that all employees must use multi-factor authentication for accessing sensitive systems. Then an example of the role. The CISO is tasked with overseeing information security while the department heads ensure compliance within their teams. Clause 6 is all about planning. Have you conducted a risk assessment? Is there a risk treatment plan in place? Are your security objectives SMART? SMART means specific, M for measurable, A for achievable, R for relevant, and T for time bound. Now, Clause 6 focuses on identifying risks and opportunities for the ISMS and creating plans to address them. It also involves setting measurable information security objectives. So, the key points over here would be risk assessment, which means identify and evaluate risks to information security. The risk treatment plan, decide how to address risks, accept, avoid, transfer, or mitigate. Security objectives, define objectives that align with the organization goals and are measurable. Now, a few practical examples. Like in risk assessment example, a financial institution identifies phishing attacks as a high risk area and evaluates potential impact and likelihood. Now, for example, for risk treatment, a logistics company implements email filtering tools to mitigate the risk of phishing emails. Now, as an objective example, an e-commerce company sets an objective to reduce data breaches by 50% within a year through employee training and zero trust architecture, or at least a next generation firewall. Now, clause 7 is support. Are there adequate resources for ISMS implementation? Are employees trained in their roles? Is there a clear process for managing ISMS related documents? So, clause 7 basically addresses the resources, competence, awareness, and documentation required to support the ISMS. The key points over here would be resources, ensure sufficient personnel, technology, and funding for ISMS implementation. Competence, train employees on their roles in maintaining information security. Communication, promote awareness of the ISMS across all levels of the organization. Documented information, maintain and control documents related to the ISMS. Let's take a few practical examples. Resources example. A retail company invests in a new SIM, security information and event management basically. Now, this new SIM system to monitor security incidents. Now, the competence example. Employees are trained to identify phishing emails and reporting them to the IT team. Now, example for documentation. The IT department creates a centralized repository for ISMS policies, procedures, and risk assessments. Now, Clause 8 requires organization to implement and operate the controls necessary to manage information security risks effectively. So, do you have controls in place to address information security risks? When I say do you have, I mean the organization does it have? Is there a process for managing security incidents? Are third-party risks like vendors being addressed? So the key points over here would be operational planning, define how processes will be managed to achieve information security objectives. The risk treatment implementation, implement selected controls to mitigate identified risks. Incident management, establish procedures for responding to and recovering from information security incidents. Few practical examples. Let's take an operational planning example. A SaaS provider creates detailed procedures for onboarding new employees, including access control setup. The risk treatment example. A healthcare provider encrypts patient data to reduce the risk of unauthorized access. Incident management example. A telecom company sets up a 24/7 incident response team to handle DDoS attacks. So clause 9 is all about performance evaluation. Are internal audits conducted regularly? Does management review ISMS performance periodically? Are you, or rather the organization, are they tracking key metrics for information security? Clause 9 focuses on monitoring, measuring, analyzing, and evaluating the performance of the ISMS. It includes internal audits and management reviews. So the key points to cover over here is monitoring and measurement. Use key performance indicators, KPIs, to track ISMS performance. Internal audits, ensure that you conduct regular audits to ensure compliance with ISO 27001. For management review, periodically review ISMS performance with top management and discuss opportunities for improvement. So few practical examples. For example, the monitoring example, an organization tracks the number of detected and resolved security incidents monthly. Audit example, an IT company conducts an internal audit to ensure that its access control policy is consistently followed. Management review example, the leadership team reviews audit findings and decides to invest in additional staff training. Now, clause 10 is all about improvement. Is the organization addressing non conformities with corrective actions? Is there a process in place for continually improving the ISMS? Assess each of these areas and you'll have a clear picture of where you stand. Clause 10 requires organizations to continually improve the ISMS by addressing non conformities and taking corrective actions. So, the key points here would be non conformity management, which is identify and address gaps or failures in the ISMS, corrective actions, implement changes to prevent the recurrence of issues, continuous improvement, regularly update processes to adapt to new threats and challenges. Now, let me give you a few practical examples here as well. The non-conformity example, an internal audit reveals that the employees are sharing passwords. The organization enforces a stricter password policy and conducts refresher training. The corrective action example would be after a phishing incident, the organization implements an advanced email security solution and educates employees on recognizing scams. Now, the continuous improvement example. A fintech company reviews its risks treatment plan annually to incorporate emerging threats like ransomware. Prioritizing gaps and developing an action plan. Once you've identified the gaps, the next step is to prioritize. Not all gaps are created equal. Focus on the critical ones first, those that pose the biggest risk to your organization or are essential for ISO certification. Then create a detailed action plan for each gap. Define the corrective action needed. Assign responsibilities to specific team members. Set deadlines for when the action needs to be completed. And finally, allocate the resources, whether it's budget, tools, or training. This plan becomes your blueprint for closing the gaps. Okay, now let me give you some good news. You don't have to do all of this manually. There are some tools that can help you. Templates and checklists. Use these to track compliance for each ISO clause. There are risk management tools. There are many softwares out there that can simplify risk assessments. GRC platforms. Again, there are softwares which can help you manage compliance holistically. There are document control tools like SharePoint, make it easy to manage and update policies. Now, these tools not only save time but also help ensure accuracy throughout the process. So now, what are the benefits of ISO 27001 gap assessment? By now, you might be wondering, what is it in it for me? Now, here are the key benefits, like I would like to list them down. Like, you'll identify non-compliance issues before they become audit problems. It will strengthen your overall security posture. It will reduce risks like data breaches. It will streamline the path to ISO certification, saving you time and resources. And finally, it will build trust with your customers and stakeholders by showing your commitment to security best practices. So now that's it. Thank you so much for patiently listening and probably learning as well. So ISO 27001 gap assessment might sound like a lot of work, but it's the foundation for a secure, compliant organization. By following the steps we have discussed today, you will not only meet ISO standards for your organization, but also protect your business from evolving cyber threats.